The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm James Spencer, your host, and I am joined today by Katelyn Beaty. Katelyn has a substack called the Beaty Beat, and I just encourage you to go look at that. That's how I was originally introduced to her work. She's also co-host of a podcast called Saved by the City, and the author of a 2022 book, Celebrities for Jesus, which is a fantastic book. I bought it after I found you on Substack, Katelyn, and actually read through it and loved it. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. And how you doing this morning?
You know, I'm glad it's Friday. It's been a long work week. It maybe has been the same way for you. But yeah, really looking forward to our conversation.
I got to say, I've got a little senioritis this week because I'm going on vacation beginning on Sunday. So yeah. I'm kind of itching for the weekend to get here. So
yes, I understand.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, I kind of told you in our pre-interview, but the piece that really I found most interesting when I was reading through your Substack, which has a lot of interesting pieces, but the one that drew my attention the most was the pieces on the Evangelical Bro Code. And you did, I think, 4 pieces, if I'm correct, sort of an earlier one, and then you went through and did another series of 3. I'm just interested to hear how your process was so interesting in doing that. And so I'm wondering if you'll talk through the process of how you came to the insights you came to about the Bro Code. And maybe before you start on the process, maybe we should talk about what the Bro Code actually is. So
yeah, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
So the initial essay I wrote about the Evangelical Bro Code really arose out of conversations that I was having with other women leaders in Christian institutions, nonprofit organizations, churches. And I was starting to really, I'm a journalist, and so I'm really interested in patterns and trends and trying to see the bigger picture. And I started to connect the dots between the stories that I was hearing and the details that were included, realizing, first of all, a lot of women in Christian organizations are struggling in those spaces. And in general, they were telling me that over time they were kind of slowly edged out of these institutions, whether by overt or covert bullying, male colleagues who refused to meet with them one-on-one. Sometimes it was the reality of being severely underpaid for their work. Meanwhile, their male colleagues are making significantly more. So gender pay gaps, but really starting to connect the dots to argue that there are many dynamics in evangelical institutions that are hard for women and have been hard for women for a while. These are not really new dynamics. Honestly, I thought maybe they had gotten better. I worked in an evangelical organization for almost 10 years, Christianity Today magazine. Definitely could speak from personal experience about some of these dynamics, but I kind of hoped in 2024, maybe there would be the ability for women to flourish in these institutions. And so the first piece was just saying, this is what the Bro Code is. This is how women are being affected by it.
Yeah.
And then from that received an outpouring of response from women in various sectors, essentially saying, yep, this describes my experience too. So then, my journalist brain is thinking, oh, wow, there's probably a bigger story here. I ended up inviting women to submit their own stories of the Bro Code, and to this day have received responses from about 180 women. Now, that's a qualitative sample. I can't extrapolate from that to all of Christendom, but there's certainly a pattern. And so the following pieces were really about unpacking some of the patterns that I saw in those stories that were submitted.
And what were some of those patterns? I mean, you lay them out in I think the second article that you wrote, but maybe
Yeah.
talk through those patterns just so people have an idea of what we're thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I landed on an alliteration to help people remember, but the three B's would be breadwinner bias. So that's a shorthand for describing the assumption that on the whole, men in Christian organizations should be paid more because they are the primary breadwinner for their families.
Yeah.
The second B is the Billy Graham rule, which is, a kind of personal ethical code of conduct among some Christian men that they won't meet alone with female colleagues. They won't meet alone with any woman who is not their wife, including female colleagues. And I talk about why that can really disadvantage women in the workplace. Right. And then the third B is just bullying. Just whether, bullying can look like a lot of different things, but a kind of intimidation or abuse of power directed at women because they are women, because there are male colleagues of theirs who just don't want to work alongside women, and they're slowly edged out. So yeah, breadwinner bias, Billy Graham rule, and bullying.
Bullying. And I think maybe we just walk through each one of those. And I think one of the things I found interesting about the breadwinner bias is that you saw not just a gender pay gap in the way we might usually think of it. A woman getting paid less for doing the exact same job a man is doing, but also that deference to men and the assumption being that they are the breadwinners of the family. That was such an odd one for me because, just to be really transparent, my wife has always made more money than I have. And so it was such a weird, like, looking at it, I read it and I'm like, yeah, I could see how that would work. It wasn't my experience, but I could totally see instances across my career where I'd watched those kinds of decisions being made. And so it was really more than just a pay gap. It was very much a preferential treatment of and an assumption that this is the social structure that should be in place. And so we've got to support that. Is that a fair?
Right. Yeah, definitely. One woman that I spoke with was volunteering at her local church, was happy to volunteer up to a point, and then realized, I'm spending 20 to 30 hours working at the church. She wanted to initiate a conversation with church leaders about turning that into a part-time paid position. And the church leader said, well, we assumed that you would be happy to volunteer because your husband makes good money. Which is hard for me to imagine church leaders saying to a man who is volunteering, whose wife makes good money, theoretically. This came up a lot in church cultures, where, there can be some blurred boundaries around what's work, what's ministry, what's serving. Right. And I would, I'm willing to bet most people who work at a church are not there to make a lot of money. But at some point you start to look at how many women are doing behind the scenes, kind of thankless, but very crucial work to keep the doors of a church open. And at some point they're asking, I'm doing a lot of work, sometimes more work than the men on staff, who are getting paid a salary, or a living wage. This doesn't seem right. And it happens to fall along gender lines.
It's interesting. I mean, I started in seminary in 1999. So that's kind of dating myself. But one of my professors, I can remember distinctly, he was teaching, I think, a class on the pastoral epistles. And he said to the class, men, your wives should never make more money than you do. And I remember it because in that moment, I'm thinking, well, my wife's studying to be a pharmacist. I'm going into ministry. I'm not even sure, like, even on a part-time basis, she worked one day a week. I think she's going to make more than, and so I'm kind of sitting back. I'm like, does that even ring true with me? Even if I'd have believed it, I'm not sure how I would have avoided it. But I think it goes to this idea that how deeply ingrained these things can sometimes be, that, here you have a professor giving this maxim to a group of people who are going to be moving into ministry and reinforcing this kind of perception.
Right.
Where, you're supposed to be the one to take care of the family. These money power dynamics within a marital relationship can be troublesome. And so you need to make sure that you're not somehow diminished within your marriage because you make less.
Right.
I think is the point he was going for. But it just gives me when I was reading that kind of came back to me, and I was like, wow, this was really deeply embedded in a lot of these circles that even on the educational level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's worth underscoring. I imagine that the seminary professor held to traditional complementarian understandings of male-female dynamics in a marriage and in the church.
Yeah.
And I honor that many of my fellow Christians come to those convictions earnestly and in good faith.
Sure.
But this maxim that he provided is obviously highly culturally specific. We forget that even the breadwinner breakdown, where one person, one spouse, traditionally the husband, goes out and makes the money and comes home, the wife takes care of the home front. That's a relatively new societal setup. For most of human history, men and women have worked together in agrarian societies, like on the farm, in the household together to provide for their family. So at the very least, a maxim like that should be contextualized instead of it sounding like this is a rule for all people in all time, all marriages, when I think especially in the modern world, only more so now than in 1999, more families feel that both spouses need to work to provide for the family, and women have made incredible gains in the workplace. And I feel that the church should be a place that honors and celebrates that.
Yeah. Well, and I think to circle back around to a point you made on the complementarian piece, yes, it was a complementarian school. And I think what I've sort of come around to is the idea that complementarianism doesn't have to lend itself to these sort of biases, though I can see how it often does.
Right.
And so it's just a question of how do we recognize these biases initially and then build safeguards around so that they don't impact the way the rest of our lives go. I can remember interviewing at a church, and they were an elder, male elder only sort of church. But then the question becomes, well, how do the male elders interact with the women to make sure that even if they're not making the decisions, they're having influence over the way the decisions are being made? There were no processes in place for that to even happen. Those are the areas where I see, these kind of biases, like the breadwinner bias, really falling by the wayside. Like nobody's even thinking about this happening. It's sort of a silent suffering that's happening within the church. It goes on and on and on. And it's almost dealt with just on an ad hoc basis. But it never, what I really appreciated about your articles and the process that you went through is it does demonstrate a pattern, and it does demonstrate a critical mass of this going on that probably needs to be addressed in a more substantive way than it is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the point about how complementarian beliefs relate to these dynamics with the Bro Code, I do want to underscore that many of the women I heard from would say they're in egalitarian settings, or they're in ministries, or, I heard from several women in higher education where the institution would formally say, we support women in leadership. We want gender parity. So I don't want to single out complementarians. Right. I would say, though, that in some of these dynamics, I do think complementarian beliefs and norms kind of give the Bro Code a kind of momentum, or a kind of unchecked, this is just how things are, right? And it's not until, I think, ad hoc, as you said, is unfortunately the case. It's dealing with women who are hurting in a kind of after the fact basis, when I think we can all hope there's real.
At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than money. It's a way to support the people, causes, and community you love, because helping you put your faith into action is at the heart of what we do. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
Cultural change and interrogation to be proactive
Yes.
about caring for women in the workplace.
Yeah, definitely don't want to suggest that it's rooted in complementarianism, but I agree with you. It does tend to give it that sort of momentum or inertia that tends to reinforce some of these things, perhaps more than egalitarian settings, although not necessarily. And
Right.
so, as we kind of said at the beginning, or as I mentioned before the interview, these are dynamics that happen even outside of the Christian setting. And so there's no theology in place. And it's just sort of one of those weird cultural things that sometimes happens. And so, yeah, very good. And let's move to the Billy Graham rule, because one of the things that I found really interesting, I think I may have gotten this off of the Saved in the City episode where you all talked about the Bro Code. But I think there was reference to men not wanting to meet one-on-one with women, even on Zoom. and I found that fascinating. I mean, like, this meeting couldn't happen for some people.
Right. Yeah, I only heard of the Billy Graham rule going digital from a couple women. So I don't know how widespread this is, but that surprised me as well. I think in part because if you want to apply a kind of boundary in interpersonal relationships in the workplace, not meeting one-on-one in person, that makes more sense to me than we can't talk on Zoom, because it adds a weird charge to what, I mean, I have to be in Zoom meetings with my boss, who's a man, with my colleagues who are men, all the time to get work done. And they are very boring meetings, right? And so the woman who shared that story with me, she was working in a ministry where, she was told she could not meet one-on-one with her male colleagues over Zoom. She was told that she had to find a chaperone for those meetings. And she just said, that's just so awkward that I never set up meetings with my boss or my colleagues, because it adds this charge that shouldn't be there. And it's also asking me to do the work to respect somebody else's boundary. Like, if that's your boundary, you should be the one to be taking the responsibility to set it up in the way that you feel like it needs to. Another woman, her colleague tweeted something about going on vacation with his family, and she tweeted back, "Oh, have a great vacation." And she was reprimanded for interacting with him publicly in that way. And I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if it's specific men worrying that might look like something to other people, but it's just unfortunate that the woman was reprimanded for that when she was doing something rather innocuous and even like a kind thing to say to a colleague. So I can't really wrap my mind around the Billy Graham rule gone digital. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it seems like such an odd arena to draw a line, but I can see where people would say, well, there could be abuses that take place, but you could say that about anything. You could say that about texting. You could say that about phone calls. You could say that about any sort of communication. And so at what point does it just become sort of ridiculous where, you're barring communication between men and women unnecessarily, just on the off chance that something bad could happen. Right. I mean, it just makes no sense on the digital side. I'm with you. I think on the physical meeting side, maybe, but I also think that, so I was in higher education for 11 years and had a lot of female employees and female students and all that kind of thing. And our offices all had glass doors. You could look right in. And so you could still have private conversations and meet one-on-one with women or female students or what have you. But there was a transparency there. But that was the same with the men. You know, I mean, it wasn't like I was leaving the door open to talk to women and keeping it closed to talk to men. It was all the same. It's just everybody could peer in and see that I was having a private conversation. And so it just seems to me that there are other ways to crack the nut here that maybe we're unnecessarily burdening women who could use, younger in their career, use mentorship, use guidance, those kind of things. And we're just overburdening it.
Yeah. And I think the relation to women's advancement in the workplace is really the key issue. Yeah. A woman who had a very high up role at a large church in the Midwest. The church leaders had the Billy Graham rule instated, and she was one of the very few women at that kind of top senior leadership level in the church. And that just meant fewer opportunities to meet with her colleagues while her colleagues would kind of get together and go out and do guy things. And I don't think there's any problem with male colleagues going out and doing guy things, but sure. It understandably felt quite exclusionary to her, and that there were certain crucial conversations that she needed to have related to HR. I mean, she was working in HR, so these are sensitive, confidential conversations that need to take place kind of one-on-one in a private setting. But for those meetings, she was asked to have a chaperone. And I just think, as much as she loved the church and her job, those onerous rules became too much for her to feel like she had to kind of manage on her own, while her colleagues didn't really have to think that much one way or the other about them.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part to me as I was reading through this, I'll try to phrase it like this. I think that if the Billy Graham rule is going to be used in the way you're describing it, right, and you make reference to the Billy Graham rule was not just about this, right? It had other components that have sort of gone by the wayside. But when we reference the Billy Graham rule, often this is the one piece that we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. This, don't meet alone if you're a man, don't meet alone with a woman, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. What struck me was that if that's going to be the rule, there almost needs to be an extension of that rule to make sure that you're not showing favoritism to the men.
Right.
And I've never seen that done.
Right.
Right. Like, I'm always going to have a chaperone in meetings. No one ever gets my private time. But most leaders would never think to do that.
Right.
But they're fine cutting out 50% of their workforce and just saying, yeah, you can't meet with me privately. I'm sorry. It's an issue of, potential sexual impropriety, and so we can't do it.
Right.
It's a very strange sort of thought process that doesn't notice, I think, that you're actually disadvantaging women in that setting.
Yeah, I've written about the Billy Graham rule a few different times, and one of the common points of pushback I get is essentially, why are you dinging good, godly men for wanting to honor their marriages and be above reproach? And I want to honor that instinct. I want to honor that desire.
Sure.
Among leaders. And also, I think it's way past time those leaders think about how their own personal conscience decisions are negatively affecting their sisters in Christ. And I agree with you that if that is your personal rule, then there needs to be an application of it in a broader way so that it is not discriminatory. I mean, there's no other way that it, if for example, if you are a man in a leadership position and you only meet with men, and you have, a young man and woman who are both coming up in the ranks and want to be mentored, want to learn, want to grow, but you only meet with the young man for mentoring opportunities, it seems quite apparent to me how that would be discriminatory, especially if the young woman, if there aren't other women in positions of leadership that the young woman can turn to for her own mentoring.
Which there often aren't, because this dynamic's been going on for a very long time. And so
exactly.
It's a really, even when I was in higher ed, we had some female executives in sort of, let's say, the legal realm or certain other positions, but there were very few upper level academic or no female academic deans. The provost wasn't a female, none of those positions were female. And so you sort of have to sit back and ask yourself, well, where does a female faculty member who may desire heaven forbid, to move into administration, like
Mm.
where would she go?
Right.
It
Right.
just it represents a ceiling, particularly I think when the Billy Graham rule's in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I thought that one was very interesting, and I think I did see that one play out more specifically in my experience, which was
Mm.
really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, like I said, the glass doors kind of helped me. I'd never had any
Mm-hmm.
particular qualms about it, but you can definitely see how birds of a feather sort of come, flocking together would be problematic. And
Mm-hmm.
so, unless you're just sort of generally unfriendly like I was, you're going to develop social relationships with other guys that are going to allow you to network up,
Right.
or pull those who you're familiar with up into positions,
Right.
which
Right.
which does create, it's an issue of partiality,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, well, let's pivot to bullying real quick. Bullying is kind of
Mm-hmm.
one of those words that can apply in a lot of different ways, and so I'm really
Right.
interested to dig into this one. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean by bullying?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right that it's a word that we're hearing more, I think,
Right.
as more people talk about abuses of power inside various organizations. But yeah, it can sometimes be hard to know, are we talking about a colleague who's just kind of a jerk sometimes, or is it something more uh, concentrated and directed than that? So one of the women I spoke with for this series, her name is Emily Highland. She's written and spoken very publicly about her experience working at a church in the Chicago suburbs. She had worked there in a director of operations role for several years. And when the new pastor came in, according to Emily, he basically refused to interact with her. There would be, a series of meetings or conversations where he would talk to everybody else but her. And then meanwhile, he, via email communication, was really what she felt to be was harsh about her job performance, that, she would say she had never received negative feedback on her job performance. And then, according to her, when he came in, he really started to, what she felt like was single her out, in a negative way.
Sure.
So that story to me highlighted that bullying isn't always, you have the obvious examples of a boss coming into your office screaming about something, a mistake that you made.
Yeah.
Or being emotionally volatile, kind of controlling the mood of the staff or the organization based on their emotional state. Obviously, like name calling, verbal threats, saying things like, maybe you don't belong here anymore. I mean, you have all those stories, which I think could be easily categorized as bullying, but bullying can also be more covert or kind of cold, like edging somebody out over time, refusing to interact with somebody. It can be gossip, it can be like, I don't know if they're as loyal to our mission as the rest of you, like questioning someone's loyalty to the mission, questioning somebody's Christian orthodoxy, that can come up sometimes with women in higher profile positions in Christian organizations, especially if a certain donor base or vocal minority on the internet is wreaking havoc over this person's presence. Sure. They're secretly liberal, they're secretly unbiblical, whatever it is. So
yeah,
it can look like different things, but the core effect for women is to feel unsafe. And I don't know if that's too soft of a term, but to feel like their footing within the organization is unsteady, that they have to work harder to keep their job. They feel threatened. They might feel like they can't talk to other people about what's going on. Then you get into issues of HR, and HR departments not always having great channels for confidential reporting when things come up. some of this, when questions are raised, it can be, you need to forgive. He didn't mean to be like that. He's having a rough time. He look at how much he's doing for the organization. So some of this is not just the person who is bullying one of their coworkers. It's also a kind of cultural, broader acceptance of the person's behavior. Kind of, we don't question the leader, or just giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. I like
there's a lot there, and it's not a fun topic, but it's an important topic.
No, I like the way you describe it. I think the normal abuses of power, I think at least everybody kind of would have an intuitive sense that those are what we're talking about when we're talking about bullying. But I like the way you describe the colder activities, the various ways that people in power can actually abuse their positions without it really appearing that they're abusing their positions.
Right.
Like the influence that leaders hold within an organization, the way they talk about other employees, the way they evaluate other employees, the tasks they give them to either set them up for success or failure.
Right.
All of these things can become ways that if I don't like you, I can make sure that you're not around as long as you'd like to be.
Right.
Is that a fair way of summarizing it? Like,
yeah,
that cold aspect of it.
Yeah. And I think you're right that because it's covert, it can be harder for other people to name and identify. And it can even be harder for the person who's on the receiving end of it to identify. Yeah. I think everybody knows a boss who comes into your office screaming and using obscenities. Yes, everybody agrees. This is bad. This is bullying. But I think a lot of women who shared their experiences of bullying with me would say for a long time, they're like, is this really happening? Am I making this up? Is this, is he just having a bad day? Did I misread that? Until there is such a clear pattern and an intuition that, no, you're not making this up. There is something happening here with this person's behavior to you and their use of power that is making you feel on the margins. This isn't just in your head, and you have to try to address it, to speak to someone else, to, sometimes it's trying to speak to that person directly. And that can be very risky because you don't know how they're going to respond to your pushback. And if they're already trying to marginalize you, it's probably not going to go well. So I'm just reiterating that kind of path of recourse can be hard to identify.
Well, my suspicion in this would be that within an evangelical or a Christian organization, that direct confrontation would be even harder. Simply because it begins to rub against general conceptions of what a man and a woman are in relation to one another. And that sort of direct confrontation would just seem to me to be inflammatory of the situation, as opposed to being like an accepted, oh, she's standing up for herself and I've done something wrong and now I need to change. It's more like, why is she challenging me? I'm in leadership here. And so I don't have any obviously data for that, but just again, my suspicion is that you can kind of see the people who are willing to bully are probably also going to be willing to take that sort of explicit articulation of a concern in the wrong way.
Yes. Unfortunately, I shared this in the Substack essay about bullying. And I don't know to this day whether I would categorize my experience with a former colleague as bullying. But there was an instance where I felt that he interacted with me in an aggressive, harsh way.
Yeah.
And I spoke with our boss. We both reported to the same person, and our boss tried to mediate the conflict between us. And my colleague said, I think you're getting really emotional and like you're blowing this out of proportion. And that was very upsetting to me, not only because he had been the one to have this emotional outburst in my office. So both of our emotions were heightened. And also it reinforced the narrative that women are overly sensitive. They take things too personally. They're reading into things, like they're not cool-headed. So it didn't go as I had hoped, for exactly the reasons that you are articulating, that when you're working in institutions that have a foundation of gender hierarchy or a very hard and fast gender scripts about, what a man is in leadership, a woman is in a submissive role, I don't think those direct confrontations have a chance of going very far.
Yeah, I will say I think I've learned this, and I wasn't trying to, like, I don't want to portray myself as some sort of enlightened man who just figured all this stuff out. I accidentally, I would say, I mean, I guess I intentionally engaged her, but I accidentally had a female executive coach for a year. And that process really was very revealing. Super helpful, really revealing, having somebody not only with the business acumen to kind of coach me and help me be a better leader, but also coming at it from the perspective of a female, helping me knock off some of these rough edges. I didn't get rid of all of them, but I thought that was really helpful. And then I think the other side of it, though, is my wife and I have sort of helped each other as we've gone through our careers, as we have those kind of conversations about work and, hey, this is what's going on. What do you think I should do? How should this work? There have been times when I'll give her advice and she'll go, yeah, that would work for you. It won't work for me. Like, we need to.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
I think this. And so that process, I think, of just like reasoning in my head going, well, what would I do? And why wouldn't that work? And what could I tell my wife that would be more helpful to her? That process, I think, has really been forming for me, because I think I've had to unlearn a lot of behaviors that I would never have identified as problematic, but were problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is a really good segue to talking about, so many people kind of at the end of this series on the Evangelical Bro Code have essentially said, okay, how do we fix this? Like, this is clearly a problem. How do we move forward? And I really have come up a bit short. I wanted to underscore for women who are in unhealthy Christian organizations, you don't have to stay. I think some women feel this sense, maybe a Christian obligation to stay, oftentimes because you love the organization, you care about your work. Sometimes it's, how will things change from within unless I stay? And I don't want to squelch the voice of the Holy Spirit in women's life, if that is where God has led you to. And also I wanted to reassure women, if you are having panic attacks going into work, if you are having a mental health crisis because your boss is bullying you, if you learn about a gross pay gap and realize going to a secular corporate organization would, at least when it comes to pay, honor my work and my training and my talents more than this. So you don't have to stay out of this sense of Christian duty. And part of why I wanted to underscore that is because I don't think it's women's responsibility to change these dynamics ultimately. I think a lot of this rests with men in positions of leadership. And I know a lot of men in these organizations who want to do the right thing. They want to honor their female colleagues. They want everybody to flourish in the organization. They don't want to tolerate bullying.
Yeah.
It can be hard to know how to change an institutional culture. And sometimes it only takes a few, the saying is a few bad apples spoil the bunch. Yep. I think that is true. And it's hard to know sometimes to do with the bad apples. But the point being, I think there's some work that Christian men need to do around these issues. And your examples of meeting with, just the fact that you're married to someone who is a professional who's wrestling with her own workplace questions and challenges. You're in this open conversation about that, where you're learning things about her experience in the workplace as a woman that aren't true for you, as well as meeting with a female executive coach. I think just the willingness to keep growing, and to keep being formed is huge, because it would be so easy to just accept bro code dynamics as a bro because they really work for you. Like that's how it's designed. It's designed to kind of work for you. You don't have to resist it or face its fallout in a direct way. So I think a lot of this is maybe even a kind of opportunity of spiritual formation for some Christian men in these organizations.
Yeah, and I think I understand it gives us a privilege within the workplace. But I can remember when I first got my job, so I was out of work for a long time, couldn't find a faculty position, just had been rejected from a number of different jobs. I was finishing my PhD up, couldn't find a job. Mm-hmm. So I hopped into as an assistant dean of online education. Been working there maybe 6 months, maybe a year, somewhere in that time range. And my boss came in, sat down on my desk, kind of up above me in my chair. And he just said, "James, I think you're getting by on your good looks and charm." and at the time, you don't really know how to take that.
No.
but I think as I reflected on it, I was like, I probably am. Because I can. Mm-hmm. Like, I looked enough the part at the institution that I was working in that I could just get by. I didn't actually have to do much more than that. Mm-hmm. I just had to sort of be one of the boys.
Right.
And so I think there's a sense in which, now in my situation, I didn't want to lose my job. I had a lot wrapped up of self-identity in me working and earning a paycheck and, contributing to my family and contributing just professionally. So I didn't want to lose my job. So it was the kick in the pants that I needed to sort of actually start working and
right.
moving beyond just being a bro. But I can also see how that throughout my career very much helped me. Mm-hmm. As long as I didn't rock the boat too much, there were things I could get by with that other people couldn't.
Yeah.
And so it was a very strange sort of situation where I would say on a professional level, it was extremely helpful. Wouldn't deny that. On a character building and spiritual level, it was corrupting. It was very hindering. And I think that's part of what, when we talk about the solution to this, I think we got to get back to something that looks more like character matters more than results.
Yeah.
And then as whoever's in leadership, man or woman, I think we have to just embrace the idea that crap rolls uphill. That if this is going on in your organization, it's yours to deal with. And I think that's really difficult for most people. They want to sort of do what your boss did and kind of mediate a situation. It's like, no, mediation can work, but at some point somebody's got to actually take control of the situation.
Yeah.
Deal with the root issues. And
right.
So I don't know, just there's a couple of my thoughts, like that character matters more than results, which is really hard to pull off in most organizations that have to get results.
Right.
But then also that idea that, no, the leader is whatever the leader's allowing, he's endorsing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm even though it was an odd comment, I'm sure, to receive from a coworker, it sounds like it kind of was it prompted a kind of gut check for you to acknowledge, at the end of the day, that you could actually be showing up in a more holistic, character-centered way instead of just getting by. And don't we want that for anybody in a position of leadership in a Christian institution?
Well,
and I go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I don't want to frame this as like me as the hero. So I think that came much later. I think my initial reaction was very much a guy reaction. It was I've been challenged to a fight. Now I'm going to jump in the ring. And so it was more aggressive and almost anger fueled.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to show him kind of feel to it, which I think is it's a reaction. Again, as my wife and I have talked, it's a reaction that men are allowed to have generally. And it's seen as something that's very good for them to have.
Right.
And I would argue that ultimately I had to move past that to mature and get to this point where it's like, no, I don't really care what he said, but if there's some truth to it, I want to take that into account and change. So yeah, I did not respond to it well in the moment, but I think it eventually helped me move beyond that to some degree. So anyway, I just want to.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, before our conversation, you've talked about the fact that so many of these dynamics are present in mainstream non-Christian organizations and companies. And on some level, I can imagine people who work in the secular world saying, look, the things that you're dealing with in these Christian, if you only knew the things that I have had to deal with.
Probably,
I think especially of an older generation of women, kind of entering the workforce in the 70s and 80s, where they literally might have been the only woman in the room for 2 decades. And they're like, you think your situation is hard. So I acknowledge that these dynamics exist in almost every institution and sector of society.
Yeah.
And also, I want to say, as a Christian, as someone who cares about the witness of Christian organizations and the witness of the local church, don't we want to be different and better? Don't we want to be different from and better than the patterns and assumptions that we see in the world, quote unquote? And we have a story given to us in scripture and in church history of women being honored, being lifted to a place of honor and respect that cuts against so many of the attitudes and behaviors of the rest of the world. And so this just feels like this isn't just a matter of making sure that women in the church are flourishing. It's also a matter of cultural witness to a watching world, so that we can say, actually,
that's good.
We're places where women can flourish. I know that they deal with all this junk everywhere else, but this is a place where women are treated with dignity and respect and given a place at the table, and not just out of a sense of, I guess we should do this, but we need your insights. We need your talents. You trained, you've spent years and money to prepare yourself for this kind of job. We want all of your talents. Like we can't afford not to have you in our organization.
Yeah. I think, number one, I think that's going to require a lot of ministries to slow down. It almost has to be something where you sit back and say, we're going to do this, whether it works immediately or not. So I would recognize that, yes, I think we want to leverage all the talent, male, female, whatever, in the best ways we possibly can. And that long term, that is absolutely the right way to go. I think the mind shift that's going to happen is it may not be a short term win. It's just the right thing to do.
Yes.
And on some level, you honor the person and you trust that to play out however it's going to play out.
Right.
But compromising, honoring the person is probably never going to take us where we actually want to go, which I love the cultural witness aspect that you're drawing out.
Yeah. And ultimately, if organizations, when you're just thinking about effectiveness and impact, ultimately, if you want to retain the most talented employees, you have to be a place where women feel like they can show up as their full selves. Because the reality of the workplace is that when it comes to advanced degrees and gains in various sectors, in a lot of ways, women of my generation are outpacing the men of our generation. So if you're just thinking in terms of effectiveness, it is also of value, not just from like a sense that this is the right thing to do, but also we want to be a place that where women want to work. We don't want to lose out on their talent.
A great point. Let me, I know we're kind of coming up on time. I want to ask one more question. It's sort of connected to your book, Celebrities for Jesus. And so this is just something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't have any particular agenda in asking the question. I just want to get your thoughts on it. So we have a lot of this, when we talk about how do we solve the problem of the bro code, there's also this celebrity angle that you talk about in your book, right? Where everything has become very splashy and out there, and the presentation of who we are has almost outpaced the substance. That's sort of the phrasing I would use. But then as you're doing your work as a journalist, and you're thinking through, how do I present some of these ideas like the bro code out there in the world? How do I present stories maybe about women who have had this happen to them? How do you balance or even avoid the tendency for celebrity type thinking? Right. It almost has this, it feels like so many of these conversations are, they don't gain appropriate substance because we're just on to the next thing. Right. And so how do you think about that? I know it's kind of an odd one, but how do you go about thinking about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And basically, how do you write and talk about things of substance in a media ecology of, this is interesting. Oh, but there's this Instagram ad. Like,
right.
Our attention spans have been trained to be lightning quick, and the internet is not always a great place for deep thinking.
No.
And I, when I'm writing for like a mainstream national outlet, I understand that oftentimes what their editors deem to have national import often involves somebody with a public figure, somebody with some form of celebrity status. So there are times when I try to start there, maybe with the particulars of the celebrity figure, but then try to talk about the deeper dynamics that I tried to underscore this in my book. The problems of celebrity aren't just about the specific individuals who have celebrity. It is about our own desire to put people on pedestals. So, we are feeding the problem in our hearts and minds and with our wallets and with our attention. So using specific stories to then talk about broader dynamics and trends that implicate the reader and the writer, always like I'm implicated in whatever I'm writing about. That's what I try to do. And I mean, just as an aside, I have really pivoted away from certain platforms. I think Substack feels preferable because it's a long form written medium, and I don't have to figure out how to create a reel, to get people to engage what I'm trying to say. Thank goodness I don't have to figure out a reel. I just think the medium itself hopefully lends itself to a bit deeper reading and thinking than other platforms.
Well, and the podcast, I think, does that for you as well. I'm assuming, sort of Saved by the City, you get to have more substantive conversations with guests or with your co-host, and it just sort of lends itself to a longer form, deeper dive into these issues. Yeah. Whereas Instagram, TikTok, less so.
Yes. Twitter, or formerly Twitter, definitely. even though that used to be my primary platform. And then, it does not foster, I wouldn't say it's a character building platform for many reasons. So I have spent much less time there than I have in years past. So
that is a fair characterization.
Yeah.
Well, very good. I appreciate you entertaining that last question. I know it wasn't one I mentioned to you, but it's just something that's on my mind a lot, and I really enjoyed the Celebrities for Jesus. And so that was a topic that I didn't know people were writing on out there, and that I've been thinking about an awful lot. So I appreciated the work. And well, Katelyn, thanks for being here today. I think this is a really important conversation for the church to be having. I think we've got to sort of figure out how to get around the bro code, recognize that it hurts women primarily. Obviously, I think that's the biggest presenting issue, but I don't think it does men any favors either.
Yeah, and I totally agree.
Yeah, it's holding everybody back, and we really need to address it. So I appreciate you being on. I appreciate you writing your articles. And folks, if you're out there listening, I will have links to the Beaty Beat, to Saved by the City, and to Celebrities for Jesus in the show notes. I'd really encourage you to check Katelyn's work out. It is excellent, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it. So thanks for being here, Katelyn, and thanks
so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Hey, I'm Jeff King, the president of Persecution.org and the host of Faith Under Fire, where we examine threats to the faith and the transformative spiritual lessons of the persecuted church. If you're a deep Christian looking for life-changing content or just trying to make sense of political attacks on the faith, come listen to Faith Under Fire.